realistic in content, realistic in nature. We wanted to make a film about a certain of the black community.
50 years. For 50 years, one of the most important films ever made has been sitting in plain sight, and almost nobody knows the real story behind it. Not the story on the screen, the other story, the one about a script that was literally half finished, the one about a director stealing electricity from New York City streetlights, the one about a real Harlem pimp who handed over his actual car and demanded a role in the movie in exchange, the one about a music legend who secretly used his own soundtrack to fight the film he was hired to support, and the one about a brilliant actor whose one great role became a prison he could never escape. Superfly looked like a movie about style, power, and beating the system. But underneath that fur coat was a story so layered with hidden battles and buried betrayals that the film you think you know is barely the beginning. 28 secrets, decades of silence. All of it ends right now. Secret 1. The 45-page problem. Every great film starts with a script. Superfly started with half of one. The original screenplay, written by Philip Fenty, was exactly 45 pages long. A standard feature film runs between 90 and 120 pages. Director Gordon Parks Jr. was handed this half-finished document and told to make a 91-minute film out of it.
So Superfly came out in 1972 and was directed by Gordon Parks Jr., and this is a blaxploitation film.
His solution was creative desperation. He added long, quiet shots of people walking through Harlem. He extended driving sequences in post-production, letting the camera linger on Priest's car gliding through city streets far longer than normal editing rhythm would allow. He built atmosphere out of necessity. The moody, hypnotic pace of Superfly, the quality critics would later praise as visionary, was born not from brilliance, but from crisis. The most iconic feature of the film was a fast fix for a basic problem. Secret 2. The Ad Man and the Magazine. Philip Fenty was not a Hollywood screenwriter. He was an advertising executive from Cleveland, Ohio. His idea for Superfly came directly from a 1971 New York magazine cover story called The Man with the Golden Nose, a profile of a real-life rising black dealer operating in New York City. Fenty's plan was to combine the tight visual efficiency of commercial filmmaking with the raw authenticity of this real-world figure. Young Blood Priest wasn't invented from nothing. He was lifted from a magazine article and filtered through an ad man's imagination. But Fenty knew he needed someone who understood the streets. He turned to his childhood friend, and his childhood friend told him exactly where to go with the whole idea. Secret 3. The Man Who Said No. Fenty's friend Nate Adams laughed when he heard the pitch. His response was blunt. Two black men from Cleveland do not make major motion pictures. It had never been done. The idea wasn't ambitious, it was delusional. Adams wasn't being cynical for sport. He was reflecting the reality of black creative life in early 1970s America, a world of closed doors and an industry that had never offered men like them a seat at the table. Fenty kept pushing. Adams eventually came on board and became one of the most essential people in the production. The man who connected Fenty with a real dealer, giving the script its authentic foundation. But first, they needed a star. And the man Fenty had in mind was the last person anyone would expect to play a street hustler. Secret 4. The Friend from the Stage. Ron O'Neal was a classically trained stage actor. He had built his career performing A Raisin in the Sun and A Streetcar Named Desire at the Karamu House, the oldest African-American theater company in the United States. Just before Superfly, he won an Obie Award for his performance in No Place to Be Somebody. The face of the ultimate street hustler was an award-winning theater performer who had never been a criminal in his life. This gap between who O'Neal was and who he played is not a minor footnote. It is the central tragedy of everything that follows. From the moment the film released, the world would collapse the distance between Ron O'Neal and young Blood Priest, and O'Neal would spend the rest of his life unable to convince them they were different people. Secret 5. The Dentists Who Paid for Crime. No Hollywood studio would touch Superfly, so producer Sig Shore went directly to the black community, approaching local business owners one by one. The first major investors to say yes were two black dentists from Harlem, Connie Jenkins and Ed Allen. Their contributions put the production in motion. A film about drug trafficking in Harlem was literally funded by neighborhood professionals who believed in the story enough to stake real money on it. But the dentist money only went so far. Production was a continuous financial emergency, and the team was about to discover that independent filmmaking meant solving the same crisis in increasingly desperate ways. Secret 6. 5 credit cards and a dream. When the money ran out, the filmmakers did something that would make any accountant physically uncomfortable. They charged the movie to their personal credit cards. Philip Fenty used 3 of his own. Producer Sig Shore used 2 of his. 5 personal credit cards, floating a feature film in New York City. If the film failed, both men would be financially destroyed. Even 5 maxed-out cards weren't enough. Director Gordon Parks Jr. eventually reached a point where the money was simply gone. He had one option left, the most humiliating phone call of his career. He had to call his father. Secret 7. The father who saved the film. Gordon Parks. Jr.'s father was Gordon Parks Sr., legendary photographer, filmmaker, and director of Shaft, which had just become one of the defining events in black cinema. Parks Sr. was a major success. His son was broke. Parks Jr. called his famous father and asked for money to finish Superfly. Parks Sr. agreed. The success of Shaft literally kept Superfly alive. But for Ron O'Neal, this moment carried a specific sting. Parks Sr. had previously auditioned O'Neal for the role of John Shaft and rejected him, telling O'Neal he was too light-skinned for the part. Now O'Neal was watching his own director go back to the exact man who had personally insulted him and ask for money. The production moved forward, but with no budget for permits, the only option remaining was to stop asking for permission entirely. Secret 8. Stealing power from New York City. Nate Adams described the Superfly crew as guerrilla filmmakers. They were a non-union crew in a city controlled by powerful unions that were actively looking for them. They dodged. They moved fast. They filmed without permits and disappeared before anyone could shut them down. For the night scenes, they faced a problem speed couldn't solve. They needed light and had no money for generators. Their solution was breathtaking in its audacity. They tapped directly into New York City's streetlights and stole electricity from the city's infrastructure to light their movie. A film about a man who lived outside the law was being made by a crew committing crimes to keep production alive. The authenticity wasn't aesthetic philosophy, it was survival. Secret 9. The Revolutionary Crew. The financial desperation that defined Superfly's production accidentally created something historic. Because the film was independently financed, the producers had no obligation to the major Hollywood unions, which in 1971 were almost entirely white. Black technicians had virtually no pathway into union productions. The Superfly team could hire whoever they wanted. They assembled the largest non-white technical crew that had ever worked on an American film, drawing heavily from the Third World Cinema Corporation, a Harlem organization co-founded by actor Ossie Davis with the specific mission of creating film industry jobs for minorities. The guerrilla filmmaking wasn't just a style, it was a revolution, and that revolution extended to the film's most iconic image, because Priest's car was no prop. Secret 10. The Real Pimp's Car. The 1971 Cadillac Eldorado that became the defining symbol of Superfly belonged to a real Harlem pimp named KC. It was his personal vehicle, customized exactly as it appears in the film, because that is how he actually drove through New York. The crew had no money for a custom build, so they went to the source. They found KC, explained the project, and asked to borrow his car. He agreed, with one condition: he wanted to be in the movie. Secret 11. The Pimp in the Nightclub. The production agreed. In the film's nightclub scene, KC appears on screen, a real Harlem hustler standing next to an actor playing a Harlem hustler, wearing clothes designed by someone who knew that world firsthand, in a scene that would end with the actor climbing into KC's actual car to drive home. In that moment, the line between fiction and documentary ceased to exist. Superfly wasn't representing Harlem, it was Harlem, and the man responsible for every piece of clothing in those scenes was carrying a secret that ran even deeper. Secret 12. The Designer Who Lived the Life. The iconic fashion of Superfly, the long leather coats, the wide-brimmed hats, the sharp-tailored suits, was designed by Nate Adams, the same Nate Adams who had laughed at the idea of making a movie, the same man who eventually became the production's most authentic voice. Adams designed from direct observation, not fashion history. Some clothes came directly from the actors' own wardrobes. The costumes were documentation, not invention, a visual record of how people actually dressed in that time and place, assembled by someone who had been inside that world his entire life. Secret 13. The Other Priest. Ron O'Neal plays young blood priest. His partner Eddie is played by actor Carl Lee. 8 years earlier, in 1964, Carl Lee starred in The Cool World, another landmark film about Harlem street life, which Lee also co-wrote. His character's name in that film was Priest. The man playing Priest's partner in Superfly had already played a character named Priest in another major Harlem film, a hidden thread connecting two of the most important documents in black cinema history, encoded in a single character name that traveled from one film to the other. Do you think that casting was deliberate? Let us know in the comments. Secret 14. The Cocaine Commercial. One of the most debated sequences in Superfly is a montage showing the preparation and distribution of Priest's cocaine moving through the city, composed entirely of still photographs set to music. Gordon Parks Jr. shot the images himself, technically accomplished and visually distinctive. Ron O'Neal despised it. The serious stage actor believed this sequence transformed his character's criminal operation from context into celebration. He felt it turned a story about escape into an advertisement for the life being escaped. He confronted it directly, creating a major conflict with his director. His word for the sequence became the one that followed the film everywhere. He called it a commercial for cocaine, and he was right about what was coming, though being right offered him no protection from the consequences. Secret 15. The soundtrack's secret conscience. Curtis Mayfield was given the Superfly script and arrived at almost exactly the same conclusion as O'Neal. The film, he believed, made a drug dealer look like a hero. He was not willing to write music that celebrated this, so he made a secret decision. His lyrics would function as a critique of the film's message. His music would argue with the images on screen. He later described his intention plainly. He wanted his music to be the film's conscience, warning audiences about the very characters they were watching, even as those characters were being glamorized. The producers thought they were getting a party record. What Mayfield delivered was an anti-drug masterpiece disguised as one. Secret 16. The song written in 5 minutes. Mayfield read the Superfly script on an airplane and found himself unexpectedly moved, not by Priest, the charismatic lead, but by Freddy. Fat Freddy is the film's unfortunate stooge, the friend who gets caught and killed. Mayfield felt Freddy was the most honest character. His reasoning was direct. You might not know a pimp or a major dealer, but almost everyone knows a Freddy, the person who wanted the same life and paid for it with everything. He went home and wrote Freddy's Dead in 5 minutes. His son remembers finding balled-up pieces of paper on the floor, all bearing the same words repeated over and over, as Mayfield worked toward the version that felt true. The album's most famous song was not about the winner. It was an elegy for the loser. That single choice announced Mayfield's entire intention. Secret 17. The soundtrack that ate the movie. The Superfly soundtrack defied every industry prediction. Record executives expected limited returns from an album this dark and socially conscious. They were spectacularly wrong. The album went to #1 and produced 2 million selling singles. Then it did something almost without precedent in cinema history. The Superfly soundtrack outgrossed the film it was written for. The music made more money than the movie. The anti-drug critique embedded in Mayfield's lyrics reached more people and generated more revenue than the story it was secretly opposing. The warning was more popular than the fantasy. But this masterpiece was built on a betrayal that ended a friendship forever. Secret 18. The Partner Who Was Erased. Mayfield wrote the songs, but the complex orchestral arrangements that gave the album its cinematic weight were the work of jazz legend Johnny Pate, Mayfield's longtime collaborator. Pate claimed he did more than arrange existing material for 2 instrumental tracks. He claimed he wrote the melodic lines. He wanted co-writing credit. Mayfield refused, calling Pate an arranger for hire whose role ended there. Pate went to Jet magazine and accused Mayfield of taking credit he hadn't earned. Mayfield responded with a $1 million defamation lawsuit. The friendship ended. They never spoke or worked together again. The final insult was written into the album's liner notes permanently. Pate's credit reads, successfully arranged and orchestrated from the original dictations of Curtis Mayfield by Johnny Pate. That word, dictations, was a legal weapon. It reduced Pate's role to taking notes. It inscribed the dismissal into the permanent record of one of the most celebrated albums of the decade. Secret 19. Super Genocide. Superfly knocked The Godfather off the top of the box office, an achievement that was, in context, almost incomprehensible for an independent film funded by dentists and credit cards. Then the backlash arrived. The NAACP and the Congress of Racial Equality both issued immediate public condemnations. A protest organization called BANG, Blacks Against Narcotics and Genocide, formed specifically to fight the film's distribution, picketing theaters and holding signs calling the movie Super Genocide. The creators had conceived the film as a story about Black independence. The civil rights establishment received it as a tool for community destruction, a way to sell degradation to Black audiences while the profits flowed elsewhere. The controversy needed a name, and the name invented to attack this specific film would go on to define an entire decade of cinema. Secret 20. The birth of a dirty word. The term blaxploitation was not a genre label invented by film historians. It was an insult coined specifically to attack Superfly. Junius Griffin, president of the NAACP's Beverly Hills Hollywood branch, created the term to describe films that exploited Black audiences by selling them destructive images packaged as empowerment, while the profits returned to white corporations. Superfly is often listed as an example of blaxploitation cinema. What almost nobody knows is that the word was invented as a targeted attack on this exact film. It was a weapon that later became a category name. All of it attached most heavily to the person whose face was on the poster. Ron O'Neal was about to find out that being right about a danger doesn't protect you from it. Secret 21. The role that built a cage. The role of young blood priest made Ron O'Neal an international star. It also ended his career as he had understood it. He said it plainly. Outside New York, people assumed I really was a hustler. The classically trained Obie Award-winning stage actor had been overwritten by the image. Hollywood responded to his stardom by offering him pimps, dealers, and gangsters, the same character in slightly different costumes, repeated indefinitely. He appeared in Red Dawn playing a Cuban officer. He took supporting roles far beneath his abilities. He was trapped inside a fur coat the world refused to let him remove. Secret 22. The tragic final act. In 1973, O'Neal directed and starred in the sequel Superfly TNT. His intention was transparent. He took Priest out of Harlem entirely, relocating him to Africa as a liberation hero fighting for the greater good. He was trying, through the sequel, to finish the argument he'd been losing since the first film. The film failed completely. Audiences rejected the heroic Priest. They wanted the car, the coat, the hustle. They wanted the commercial. O'Neal spent the next 30 years in smaller and smaller roles. A friend said he was not pleased with most of what he had to do. After a long battle with pancreatic cancer, Ron O'Neal died on January 14, 2004. He was 66 years old. The man who played the coolest hero of a generation spent his final decades inside the limitation that hero had created. Bonus secrets 23 to 28. What history almost lost. Secret 23. The rejection that haunted everything. Parks Sr. didn't just reject O'Neal for Shaft, he told him his skin was the wrong shade of black for a black film. O'Neal carried that wound into every frame of Superfly and every conversation about his career afterward. Secret 24. The driving scenes as accidental archive. Those extended car sequences Parks Jr. added purely to pad runtime inadvertently became irreplaceable historical footage. Harlem in 1971 and 1972. Buildings demolished, storefronts gone, streets transformed. The crisis solution became documentary evidence. Secret 25. The Union Bypass as Civil Rights Act. By being too broke to deal with Hollywood unions, the production created more non-white technical film jobs in a single production than the industry had generated in years of operating normally. Secret 26. Mayfield's warning that nobody heard coming. The record executives who doubted the album's commercial potential weren't just wrong. They were wrong by a margin large enough to rewrite industry assumptions about what black audiences would buy when the music was honest rather than just entertaining. Secret 27: The Script's Second Life. Philip Fenty's 45-page problem, the incomplete foundation of the entire film, demonstrated something the industry hadn't yet accepted: that visual style and atmosphere could carry narrative weight that wasn't on the page. Every slow cinema movement that followed owed something to a desperate director filling time. Secret 28: The Legacy Both Sides Won. The NAACP tried to kill Superfly. Mayfield tried to counter-program it. O'Neill tried to correct it. Parks Jr. padded it into existence. Fenty wrote half of it. Adams doubted it would ever happen. 50 years later, the film is studied in cinema courses, the soundtrack in music schools, the fashion referenced by designers. Every secret behind it only makes that more remarkable. Superfly was made by people with no money, no permission, no union backing, and no guarantee anyone would ever see it. They stole electricity from city streetlights. They borrowed a real pimp's car. They hired a music legend who secretly opposed the film's message. They built a costume department from real life, rather than imagination. And they put at the center of it all a serious artist who knew the role might destroy him and took it anyway. The film they made knocked The Godfather off the box office. The music outlasted the film. The fashion influenced decades of style. And the man at the center spent the rest of his life unable to remove the character he'd created. This is what hidden history looks like. Not in archives, not in footnotes, but right there on screen in every long shot of a borrowed car on unlit streets powered by stolen electricity. Now you know what was really happening behind that fur coat. Which secret hit hardest? Tell us in the comments. Like, share, subscribe, and click the next video on your screen right now.